My name is Professor John Connolly, and as John said, I'm the Vice Dean of the Glasgow School for Business and Society at Glasgow Caledonian University. It's a pleasure to welcome you to this Alumni Online Talk, where we have the honour of hearing from our distinguished speaker, Elaine Boyd OBE, Director at Audit Scotland and Chair of ACCA Scotland Members Committee. Elaine is a leading public sector auditor and holds an ACCA and ICAEW qualification. She's a member of the Financial Reporting Council, Stakeholder Investment Group, representing the public sector. Elaine recently completed her 18th-month term as an Exceed Worldwide trustee, a social enterprise that supports people with disabilities in developing countries. Despite having cerebral palsy, she has been recognised as one of the UK's most influential disabled people by the Shaw Trust Disability Power 100 list in 2020 and 2022. In addition, she was awarded the ACCA UK Public Sector Advocate of the Year in 2022. Most recently, she received an OBE in the 2022 New Year's Honours List for public and charity services and had the privilege of visiting Buckingham Palace last week to collect her honour. Glasgow Caledonian is very proud that Elaine is a graduate of our institution. We are extremely grateful for her support of the university, and we are thrilled to have her back with us today to share her wisdom and experience. So, without further ado, it is my pleasure to invite Elaine Boyd OBE to deliver this afternoon's talk. Over to you, Elaine.
Thanks, John, and thanks for the introduction. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here as part of the alumni for Glasgow Caledonian University, because I see it as a real key enabler for my career that I've had so far as an accountant. And I'm looking forward to sharing a bit about my journey with you as an accountant. Probably the best thing for me to do is start right at the beginning and why did I want to become an accountant, and to share that with the audience today. So, at school, I had been really good with numbers apparently, and I went along to the guidance session and they said to me, oh, you might be able to work in a shop, and it was very much restricted due to my disability. So I got a bit disappointed at that and felt that I had an awful lot more to offer, and started thinking about what I might like to do. And one day my parents had a small family business and the accountant came to visit, and she turned up in her fancy sports car. She had a pair of high heels and a really flash suit, and I thought, oh gosh, I think that might be the job that I want to do. And I shared that with my parents and some teaching friends and things that I had at the time. And the first thing that my dad said to me was, how are you going to do that? You need to put an action plan together. And I guess that must have been the start of my auditor geek action planning mode that I've sort of created over the last 30 to 40 years. So I think knowing where you want to go is really important. I guess as an accountant, there's many roads you can take, and hopefully today I'll be able to share with you the different paths that I took. I started an accountancy apprenticeship with a very small local firm here in Milngavie, and really enjoyed that. Got lots of exposure to small local businesses in the area, from hotels, farms, all sorts of things, shops, etc. But they also introduced me to Glasgow Caledonian University. And that was a real game changer for me, because there was nothing about my disability that was going to hold me back there. They asked me what they could do, in fact, to help me. They arranged a parking space, they arranged lift access, and most of all, there was a really good peer support network there. So I'm hugely grateful for that opportunity. So over a period of about 5 years, I completed an HNC and then went on to study my ACCA examinations while I was at the accountant's office. Really enjoyed it, got lots from it, and really appreciated the global reach of ACCA, and thought that that might be something I'd like to do, is work abroad in the future. So after a period, maybe 7 years, I've done VAT returns, tax returns, accounting for taxis, all sorts of businesses, and tax returns themselves. I felt that the public sector might be a good option for me to join, and that was something that was a big step. I had been in a small firm, everyone knew me, I didn't know what I was going to do around moving into a larger environment, etc. But I went to an interview with Argyll and Clyde Health Board at that time, to be an auditor, and they shared with me what the job might involve. And I wasn't sure actually, because they talked about things like going round pharmacies, going into operating theatres, and I was a bit squeamish, if I'm honest, for counting instruments and goods and stock, etc. But also the finances of the hospitals, and that was really, really interesting to me, that an accountant could have such a significant influence on public service. So I started in the internal audit department, and then I moved into financial accounting, and then I became the finance manager for several local hospitals. That was really, really important time for me in sort of setting out what I might like to do in the future. I completed my ACCA exams there, and I got a real insight to the public sector, if you like. One week I would be maybe auditing GP fund holding, I would be auditing stocks and shares and all the different things that went on around investments, patient funds. So I had a real passion for the public sector and felt that I had a lot to offer there as well. And particularly my ACCA qualification, I felt had been really useful because it had covered public sector as well as the private sector methodologies that we might want to bring in as improvements in the public sector as well. So really great exposure there. I was also involved in the management development programmes for trainee accountants as well, and that's where my sort of relationship with the whole Glasgow Caledonian University came back in again, because we had SIPFA students back at that time that attended GCU. So I felt as if I was familiar with the area, and we were able to put quite a lot of students through that. The one thing I would say about GCU that I found, and I'm sure it's the same today, is the flexibility around what they do, and also the social mobility. There was lots of options for people to join. You could come part-time, full-time, and the support networks that were available were really helpful, particularly evening and weekend classes that were available to us. So all of us really appreciated that. I then thought about what I might like to do next. I had my daughter, and I felt that I might like to go for something more flexible. If I'm honest, being a hospital finance manager wasn't a 5-day-a-week job, it was a 7-day-a-week job, and managing the books, the finances, and just to give you a flavour, for doctors would come with requests and think I had an open checkbook, so you had to basically train non-financial managers. They were very clever people, but they maybe didn't have the skill around managing budgets and limited finances. So that was something that I particularly took an interest in, and going round doing training and courses for the clinicians in the hospital. I also was involved in GCU at that time as well, in trying to develop more programmes for ACCA that could be done part-time, evening classes as well. And I know that that still goes on, and there's quite a diverse range of courses there. What I would also say as part of that, we tried to introduce in the health service apprenticeship programmes as well. It was in a very small scale. Unfortunately, funding was an issue for us, and it didn't get off the ground completely. But I'm pleased to say I can give you an update on what we're doing at Audit Scotland around that as well shortly. So quite a range of activity I had been involved in the health service, and thought, what do I do next? So I went for a very short time and worked at the Glasgow Science Centre. I took a contract there and worked in their accounts. If I'm honest, I was very concerned about the Glasgow Science Centre at the time, and I know they have completely diversified in terms of being a venue for holding events and the way they get their funding. It was very much European funding at that time, and it was very limited. And actually the future of the Science Centre was under threat while I was there too. I got an opportunity to work at Audit Scotland, and I thought I might work there for about 6 months. That was what the plan was after I'd had my daughter. I'll do something flexible for 6 months. 22 years later, I'm there. It's still here, sorry. And I'd really like to give you a flavour for the kind of things that I've been able to do during that time, and the value that an accountant can give in the public sector. So I started off, I actually remember it very clearly, in Inverclyde Council as a temporary member of staff, staff and someone saying to me, go out and look at the payroll, you'll not find anything, it's going to be really simple, it'll just be a tick box exercise. I think I came back with 50 points, and the person I was working with was absolutely horrified. But I guess my experience of having worked in the public sector doing payroll and finance gave me a really good grounding as to understanding what controls should be in place. And as an auditor, I think that's really important. It's about providing assurance. It's not just about inspecting, reviewing, checking. It's about giving stakeholders assurance around the processes, etc., that are in place. So that's something I was passionate about, and I worked on various councils at that time in the west of Scotland, and also a bit of central government as well, which was really interesting. It also gives you the opportunity to engage with the highest level of personnel in an organisation when you go in as an external auditor. Usually your first port of call is the Chief Financial Officer, the Chief Executive, and indeed the Audit Committee as well. So you're engaging at quite a high level, but also with finance professionals as well, and understanding what they're doing. I like to think my job isn't reviewing and checking and inspecting in that way. I've always been firmly committed to providing good practice examples. So I would maybe find something at one council that could be helpful elsewhere, or maybe something that I had picked up as part of my work in the health board as well, around systems and processes. I did find it frustrating, I'm going to be honest, when I joined Audit Scotland, when I was looking at local government particularly. The accounts are very cumbersome, and I'm hoping there's some up-and-coming geniuses out there that might go a long way to looking at streamlining some of these documents that are well over 100 pages. And they cover a wide range of things. There's accounting policies, of course the audit opinions are there, there's balance sheets there, but also quite intricate and complex loans funds that are in the public sector as well. So I had to learn what went on in local government, and of course PFI schemes as well. That was a huge thing when I started 20 years ago at Audit Scotland. Lots of public bodies were borrowing money, and there wasn't a real feel for how this was going to pan out, how contracts would be managed, and how we would look at all the various aspects of that. So that was something new. But the other thing that we do at Audit Scotland that was completely new to us, it's not just the financial information that we audited at that time, it was corporate leadership, governance, financial management, how the finances are arranged as well as delivered. So all of that came into this wide spectrum, and I found that my ACCA qualification was extremely useful for that, because we had a wide range of public, private and charity sector experience. So the more I get into it, the more inquisitive I got, the more questions I asked. I probably drove people mad, but I would really encourage people that are going down an accounting career to ask questions, because that's how you learn. I sometimes ask questions, I might know what the answer is, but I just want people to think about what they're saying, and professional skepticism is definitely something that's valued, especially at the moment in the public sector where finances are always being scrutinised. So that's something to think about in your own career paths. Is this something you'd like to do? Do you want to have a wide range of activity that you could get in external audit, or are you more focused in financial accounting or financial management? I then moved very quickly up the ladder in Audit Scotland. I think they had sort of taken time to think about my health experience, and I worked on a number of health boards right the way through Scotland, from NHS 24 to the Scottish Ambulance Service, to the State Hospital at Carstairs, Glasgow Health Board. I probably have been in every health body in Scotland, and that's quite a wide range in there. There's not just mainstream health boards. For instance, the Scottish Ambulance Service, that was a really interesting audit, looking at performance targets for delivery, for ambulance times, etc. So getting into quite a lot of detail. And I really enjoyed that role, because it was something that we felt we could add value in terms of our experience, but also having audited NHS 24 and seeing the similarities in the organisations and sharing good practice there as well. So it was really exciting to be doing that kind of work. At that time, though, there were lots of financial challenges, and the chief executives and finance directors were looking at us to help them navigate their way through that. Particularly in health boards, there's a cash target every year that you have to achieve, and it's very blunt. I'm going to say that. I know it's been recorded, but I feel that it's important to say that you have to hit that target at the 31st of March for your cash, right to the pound. And people are still working in that environment, and it's very difficult because you don't always know what funding you're going to get into quite late on in the year. So having lots of financial people and lots of options available as to what we could pay, as to what we could receive in terms of goods and payment of services as well. So the finance function was really critical in terms of the annual reports for the organisations. At that time, lots of scrutiny around health bodies as well, just in terms of the Scottish Government coming in to do extra reviews on health boards. So we were very much involved in that and providing assurance as well. So I think it's very important to realise the level of assurance you're providing. It can be out with the organisation itself, it's the public, government, and actually other people in the UK just looking to see what's happening in Scotland as well. So very important in terms of the work that we did there. I then moved on and did some work in central government after that, so I had quite an exciting time with the Scottish Qualifications Authority, the Funding Council, and lots of different organisations in there. And what I'm really trying to get across in the call is the breadth of work that we were able to cover during that period and the level of assurance that we could provide. During that time, I also decided that my finance skills would be quite useful in charity sectors as well, which I'll put a health warning out there to everyone on the call. If you say you're an accountant in the charity sector, you will most definitely end up being the treasurer of that organisation. There's no other route for you, or don't tell them that you're going to be an accountant. I found the charity work really rewarding. I like my job, but I also find being able to help with charity finance is something that you see direct impact from, people getting funding, being involved in many lottery applications, children in need, all sorts of things there. And possibly the most recent experience, John mentioned that I had been a trustee with Exceed Worldwide, and I'm sure it'll be much more familiar to people on this call than me, but YouTube money, which I didn't even know existed, I actually put a health warning on it and said, I think this is a scam. And I'm sure everyone in the call will have heard of Mr. Beast, who I had no experience of, but I had no idea also just how much funding could be available going down those streams as well. So I'm pleased to report that we did receive a substantial sum earlier in the year from the YouTube royalties that were going on around that as well. So what I'm trying to display out of that one is it's not a static career. There's always changes, developments. Who would have said that there would have been YouTube money out there for charities? I had no clue that was going to be happening. And the rate of change that we're seeing currently is significant in the profession, because we've got AI coming along. There's the sustainability standards. And I think in terms of these areas, we are really well placed to deal with them, but we need to be ahead of the game to do that as well, particularly around the AI and how it can assist and not hinder our work. And of course, sustainability standards, we are KPI experts in the financial world, so I think they're easily transferable, these skills, into sustainability as well. And it's really important you keep up to date. And what I found when I was doing my studies was the ACCA was particularly good at providing updates, and they still are actually, around what are the latest developments and things. And if I look at my career, probably my only regret is that I didn't get involved in the profession earlier. So I got involved in ACCA probably about 8 or 9 years ago. I would really recommend that people get involved with their professional body quite early on, because there's a lot of support, guidance and inspiration, I guess, out there. I looked to a number of people to see what I could do in terms of development, and I've tried to keep up. John, you mentioned I've actually sat my ICAEW exams in the last year, which I can't believe that I actually went and did that. It was a conversion course course, but ICAEW have become our regulator at Audit Scotland and our independent reviewer. So I was really keen to keep ahead of the game and try and find out what their focus was and what they were doing at that time. So lots of variety again in there around our work. The job that I have currently stemmed from someone coming to ask me to develop an audit quality framework for public audit in Scotland, and I went about that probably 6-7 years ago. And just to give you a flavour for how we work, Audit Scotland do 2/3 of the audits in the public sector in Scotland, and the other third is completed by private firms, EY, KPMG, GT, Mazars. So we have 6 firms in there and assets as well doing work on our behalf. So the Auditor General and our Accounts Commission, who manage local government, asked me to prepare an audit quality framework that would enable us to measure the auditor's work. So I set about doing that. It took me about 18 months. I thought I was going to be able to find all the solutions by Google, but unfortunately they weren't there, and I really had to start building the quality framework from scratch myself. Once I had built it, I didn't anticipate what was coming next, but I was then asked to implement it. So for the last 5 years, I've been implementing our audit quality framework at Audit Scotland and developing measures and ways of providing assurance to the public and the Auditor General and Accounts Commission on the quality of audit. It's been quite a challenging time in our profession, I think it's fair to say. You'll definitely have heard of all the fines and things that have gone on around Patisserie Valerie, Caledonian, all the other organisations that are out there. And there are rising standards in terms of professional standards and auditing standards as well. So keeping up to date, again, is absolutely critical in doing the jobs that we do. I have a good news story there. I think we've probably peaked in terms of the FRC with the fines and things that have been implemented over the last 2 or 3 years. And what I have seen is a huge investment in audit quality from public and private firms. And you'll find that fines that are being raised just now relate to earlier audits. Just to give you a flavour for that, only last month the Caledonian case was finalised, and it was a £25 million fine that was imposed on KPMG, and there were also individual fines on the directors. I don't want this to put you off joining the auditing or accounting profession. I think everyone has learned now from what happened back then. There's lots of action being taken around separating audit from consultancy and other work as well, which has helped to retain independence, which is absolutely critical in the work that we do. And I think there's lots more checks and balances in all firms and not wanting to go back to that place of being worried about fines. There's always room for improvement, and I don't think it'll ever stand still, whether it be public audit or private audit. But actually, for me, that's what makes it quite exciting, and that there's always new developments around. I think also in terms of the firms, there's lots of options in there. You could maybe start in audit or start in consultancy or do different jobs. I wouldn't automatically jump there, and I know there'll be people from firms on. There's lots of other opportunities as well in medium-sized firms, maybe going into industry. I know huge opportunities within banking, within the energy sector, particularly now with renewables and things as well. So I wouldn't limit thinking just about the 4 firms. I think I would widen my thoughts on that as you're all moving into employment. I would also think about going into apprenticeship arrangements if you can to get your professional qualification, and there's many of them out there, and I'm sure that GCU have got partnerships. Well, I know they have with ACCA, but they will have with other professional institutes as well. I think mapping out your career, I'm someone that likes an action plan. I heard someone use the term earlier today, a squiggly line for your career. It doesn't have to always be going upwards. I've done a few things over the years that have taken me so far, but I've maybe went back down again and come back up just wanting more knowledge in an area. So don't think you have to keep going on this trajectory. And I think for you starting out in a career in accountancy, it's not all just about the salary. It has to be about work-life balance as well. I think that's been a big thing in my own career, that I've been able to still have a family life and take up activities and things outside of work as well. And I would strongly encourage people to do that. I also think, although the pandemic brought about a lot of significant challenges, it has actually helped us do some of our work as well. We're able to do things remotely. It means that we're not travelling as much. So I think the work of an auditor, and in my early days in my career, I would have been travelling around big pilot cases with manual files and things like that. I know we don't do that now, but that certainly isn't the case. We're actually able to do a lot of the work from our offices, albeit it's really good to get face-to-face contact with public bodies as well. In terms of setting out your own career paths, my advice is go and speak to other people. You know, sound out what you might like to do. Try and get training schemes that offer you lots of options. Don't pigeonhole yourself into a certain area, especially early on in your career. That would be my greatest advice, to just try different things out. People have said to me, Elaine, you've done this, you've done that, what is the next move? I don't really have a plan at the moment, is probably what I would say, but there's always something out there that you're keen to do. My other passion that I have, and it might come as a surprise to people on the call, is that I like to fly, and I completed a flying scholarship for the disabled back in 2018 to fly a small microlight plane, but I was really keen to find somewhere in Scotland to do that because I had to go to the south of England. The reason I'm saying this is because that flying is very linked to my accounting training and qualification, just in terms of all the formulas, what height I should be at, what the airspeed is, and if I fall to a certain level, I need to take up a certain percentage and things. So there's lots of ways that you can use your accounting skills, and I would really encourage you to do that. I am pleased to report back on that one that I have found an airfield in Perth that has a Eurostar plane. So that's my sports car that I saw the accountant appear in with 30 years ago. I finally found it, and I'm able to fly over Tayside and hopefully get my private pilot's licence in it in the next year as well. That's certainly my goal. And I think for me as an accountant, don't think about it just as the office boring job. It's always been, how can I make it interesting? And think about what value am I adding to what I'm doing. It's not just ticking off something saying I've checked these invoices or I've checked the payroll or whatever. Think about the assurance that you're providing, and it's not just numbers. It's actually giving people confidence in the work that's being carried out. John, I don't know if it's appropriate for me to stop there for questions just now. That was a lot of information in terms of what I've done. I don't know if you want to go into questions just now.
Well, just first of all, thank you very much for that input. That was really fascinating and really inspiring, Elaine. And congratulations on the flying. That's really impressive. I mean, very brave as well. Fantastic. So I'll just move to some questions that I've got, and I'll just pick out some ones that are around career, but also around kind of personal qualities and kind of leadership and the other kind of wider skills perhaps that it takes to have a successful career. And one of the questions I've got here is from Konstantinos Ritos, who has asked, what are some of the key non-accounting skills that students can create during their time at university that could help them in their possible future auditing career?
That's a good question, and I talk a lot about being work ready, and the main one there is probably being able to communicate with other people and engage with senior staff, because in auditing you tend to be thrown in at the deep end and it's the most senior staff that you're working with. So that's something that I would encourage you to do, whether it be through a volunteer role or whether it be through some work experience that you can get through GCU. I know, for instance, Audit Scotland, we do a lot of summer internships, and I would encourage people to apply for them as well, because even those sort of 6-8 week blocks give people quite a lot of knowledge and experience of actually moving into the workplace.
That's great. Thank you, Elaine. A question from Angelica Withunga, who said, I am a wheelchair user and study at GCU in order to progress my career from being a therapist to being a social worker. I have had difficulty in my career and been taken seriously by colleagues, managers, and even clients due to my disability. Do you have any tips on how to be taken more seriously in professional settings where virtually everyone is abled and many have biases? How to get people to listen to your ideas and influence others in a team to be treated more equally as a professional?
So that's a really good question, and I've got several points that I'd probably like to raise around that. In work environments, I would really encourage people to have disability confident working groups that are safe spaces for people with disabilities to go along and have discussions, provide support and help to one another. But that's at the lower level. I've actually been asked a similar question like this in the last couple of weeks to advocate for someone that was struggling just around their professional qualification. There's lots of reasonable adjustments that can be undertaken, but what I think happens is people are not aware of them. And I have always said that make sure you share if there's something that would be more helpful to you to share it, but it sounds like you're not getting the support to do that either. So I think maybe getting another student or a colleague that's on your side to join you in some of these conversations could be really helpful. And I also want to say that you might want to remind them of the Equality Act 2010 as well, because there are very clear legal obligations for many organisations in terms of what they have to do. That's a last step for me. I think it would be much better if you could actually go some way to resolving some of these issues yourself. And I appreciate that's really difficult. I've had a couple of bumpy, I talked about the squiggly line as well around my disability and people saying, oh, I don't know if you're really fit to be going out auditing. And then I've had other people that have said, well, if the buildings aren't accessible, then I'll be writing an audit report that they're not accessible and we want to get them accessible. But I don't know how we do this, but after this call, I'm happy to be connected with you. And I appreciate you might not want to give the detail here, but if John or someone else can maybe pass on my details, I'd be happy to pick that up with you at a later date.
Thank you, Elaine. I have a question from Abe Galloway, who has asked, what do you believe was the most valuable skill or piece of technical knowledge that you gained during either of your accounting qualifications?
So, oh gosh, that's a really
Technical one.
interesting question. The ACCA one for me, it wasn't just about the finances. Even back then when I did that, it was strategic leadership and things that was in there. So for me, what I got taught was it's not just about the numbers. When I was doing my qualification, it had a much wider remit than that in terms of what you're doing. The ICAEW one, I can share a bit about that because it's straight off the press. I only did this a few months ago. I found it really painful because you had to write about your own achievements and experience. And there's a lesson for me in there as well. Check the detail. I thought I had 5 essays to write. What I didn't realise was there was questions 1A, B and C, 2A, B and C. So I had 15 essays to write. So you think as an auditor I might have actually grasped that, but I hadn't. And what I learned from doing that piece of work was actually the impact personally that I've had, and it's quite good to reflect on that. Sometimes we don't take the time to reflect on what you've actually done yourself and think about, well, what can I do to improve in that? Because that's always what's in my head, what's next, and improving that. And I probably don't take enough time to just relax and say, okay, we've got through that step, have a break, go to the next one. But I think both of them different things. ACCA particularly around, it's not just the numbers, it's the whole management aspect of an organisation, and ICAEW personal contribution probably is the main thing.
Great, thank you. So we have a question from James McDermott, and he refers to himself as a friend, so you might know James.
Okay.
Potentially.
Potentially, Yep.
What has been your greatest challenge and most positive support that you've been given as someone with cerebral palsy?
So that's a really good question. So probably my journey with cerebral palsy would have been quite lonely. I would have said up until my 40s, and I can tell you what happened. I went along to a concert. My daughter was at music school at the time, and she was playing for a charity concert, and it was Bobath, Scotland back then. It's now Cerebral Palsy Scotland, and that's me to blame for that as well. I'll take the responsibility for that one. And I got connected with the organisation, and they gave me all sorts of support around these are the things you might want to think about that will help you, and different aspects to that as well. It felt like I'd just tapped into a brand new community that I hadn't experienced before. People had the same issues, same problems. So having that community thing has been the biggest impact for me. I also have a very close friend now. They introduced me to some other professionals with CP, and very aptly as I get older, she is a consultant geriatrician at the Royal Infirmary in Glasgow, and Kirsty Colquhoun and I are close friends, and you'll see us speak at the CP Scotland conferences. That's something that I do like to check in on every year, and I'll give the reason for that. I attended the first CP conference in Scotland. It would be about 8 years ago now, and there was a professor stood up from Glasgow University and said there was no one in Scotland age 50 working in a full-time role with cerebral palsy from the research that they had done. So that was my first target. You can tell as an accountant there's always a KPI in there, and I'm going to try and break it or do something with it. So when I turned 50 about 4 years ago now, I felt as if I could tick another box. And I think for me, the whole CP Scotland community thing taught me that if you get the right support and take the right action, then you can do things pretty well. And I actually spoke to a bunch of bankers and business groups and employers this morning, and I said, if you employ a disabled person, they will be the best problem solvers, because we can't usually do everything conventionally. There's something in there about we have to be more creative about how we do things, so that's quite important to me as well.
Thank you, Elaine. A question about mentorship. We've got a question from Gillian Watt, who has asked, have you had a mentor throughout your career? And how important do you think that is for students and new graduates to have a mentor?
So I would say it's really important. I didn't have one at the early part of my career, but I worked in a small office, and there was always someone saying, oh, well, you've done the farms, do you want to move on to the transport companies and different things? You know, there was always someone thinking for you. When I went to the health service, the lady that I started working for there, she was fantastic. She said to me within a few months, I don't think you'll be here very long, and don't take that personally, but she was always encouraging me to do more. I would also say, since I've joined Audit Scotland, we really encourage mentorship, and we have various ways you can do that. There's formal ways you can have a mentor. We have informal ones that you can just go and meet a member of the exec team or a manager or whatever. And we also have a hot shoes programme, which people are always intrigued when I mention that. And that's maybe just following someone for a day or two to see if you want to take the next step up, see what their job's actually like, to do that as well. But as well as having a mentor, I think it's really good that you become a mentor yourself as well for people that are starting at the beginning, because I've had as much out of that as what I get from having my own mentor too. I think it's a really valuable relationship that you can have with someone being a mentee.
Thanks, Elaine. And today, I think it was today or this week, there's been this big AI conference down south with Richie Sunak and lots of other people talking about AI, and the world is kind of changing due to AI in many ways. So we have a question here. What role will AI play in the future of your industry? And do you see it as an opportunity or a threat?
So I think there's opportunities and threats, and there I think it has a place, and I think it could be really useful, particularly in areas like analysing information and getting outliers and capturing all these different things where you've got big data sets or journals or whatever it is that you might be looking at. I still think there's a role for the accountant themselves to apply professional judgment and scepticism to that. The AI will be very mechanistic, But us as auditors, with our professional scepticism, it's hard to explain how you come about that. Sometimes it's just asking questions, and never underestimate people's at different levels in an organisation. You know, just walking around, seeing what's going on, what is the culture like here, because that can be really important. So things like AI is not going to capture that.
Thank you. And I was just wondering, I'm going to ask a question now from me, personally. So I'm very interested in public administration, and my PhD was in public administration. And when I was coming of age and studying public policy and administration, there was a big focus on best value in the public sector. Elaine, is the concept of best value, has it evolved over the years, and to what extent has that had an impact on your job?
Yeah, that's a really good question, John, because I was responsible for writing the latest Code of Audit Practice in 2021 that was released, and it's been applied to this round of appointments. So it's just being applied right now, and we're seeing the impact of that. So in the public sector in Scotland, you're absolutely right. There's a best value commitment there. It's not just the financial figures, targets, and everything that goes along with that. So I'm probably going to miss some out here, but we've got things like leadership, governance we look at, and it's called wider scope audit, and we feel that that gives a much more rounded picture of the public body, and it's an area particularly that the Auditor General will choose to report to Parliament on if there's been failures in governance, or sometimes it's even things like a shortage of finance staff, and that is something that I have personally experienced in the profession, that there's not as many people coming through. So we feel that our best value and ensuring that resources are used wisely as well, so that's something that we would look at. That is quite different to England, and I maybe should bring England into this conversation a bit as well, because I have had some involvement there. So I was responsible for the contracts for the 6 firms that we used to provide audit work for us, and that contract gets renewed on a 5-yearly basis. They have a similar arrangement in England, but all of the work is provided in local government by private firms. So there's not an Audit Scotland in England anymore. There's the National Audit Office, but they only do NHS and central government. All of local government is done by private firms. That, in my mind, has been quite problematic, and I can give you the stats on why it's been problematic. They have a massive backlog. So as of last week, there was over 900 audits that were running late, that hadn't been signed off in time, and for last year only 4 out of 400 audits had been signed off by the deadlines. So having our public sector audit provision in Scotland, I think, is very important. We have lots of challenges in meeting deadlines, and there's some coming just now because of best value too, and the additional work that we do and what's required there. But I think having a public audit agency is a really valuable resource for Scotland.
That's great. And that's really interesting, the contrast between Scotland and England. I've got a question from Gillian Watt, who's asked, what has been the one piece of advice that you have received throughout your career that has really stuck with you?
Yeah. If someone says no, ask why. So it's that sort of, no, you can't do that. And you get that in the public sector. And I think for me as an auditor as well, when people have said, oh, you don't understand, you're an auditor, we can't do that in financial management, and I'll maybe say, well, you know, in the health service I was doing this 20 years ago or whatever. So I think it's being curious. That's probably the advice that I've been given, and matching up various bits of information. And of course, third party information is always very valuable to us as well. So it's not just what's in front of you, it's looking at the wider picture as well.
And thinking about, I was thinking about your work in the public sector, and obviously in universities we were really challenged by the COVID pandemic in terms of how that had an impact on our working life, and how we had to basically implement some crisis management leadership, really, in terms of what we do. To what extent did the pandemic have an impact on your working life, and particularly in terms of how you actually go about audit and inspection?
Yeah, absolutely. So for us, I was actually quite lucky, and we were the team that everybody looked at. My team, there's 5 of us just now. We're quite widely dispersed. I've got someone in England, someone in Fife, me here in Glasgow. So we had actually been using Microsoft Teams as a team. We were piloting it. So we ended up being the team that everybody was saying, what is it you do here to communicate with people? So we very quickly, I am still amazed at how quickly we mobilised to sort of virtual working and even meeting with public bodies. The biggest challenge we had at the start was actually the platform that this is on is Zoom. Our IT team wouldn't endorse us to use Zoom, so that was quite challenging because some of our public bodies didn't use anything else. It has recently, just in the last 6 months or so, we are now allowed to use it. They must have increased their security or whatever for our IT department to allow it. But we also had to think about this evidence is coming to us via, file transfers or whatever, validating all of that as well. And even things like asset validation, we would normally have went round, particularly in the big health boards, and got stock checks or followed round in stock checks where there were material. So it was really challenging. We had to be quite creative, if you like, and innovative of how we could get assurances that we couldn't get through just physical inspection. So there was a lot of fact-finding, teams working together, new methodologies, etc. But I'm actually amazed at what we were able to do in a short space of time. And if someone had said that was a project that you had to do and implement it, it probably would have taken 10 years. But because we were forced into doing it, then I think we were able to mobilise quite quickly. And don't get me wrong, I think there's huge values in the remote working, but there's also values in having face-to-face meetings, particularly around closure of audits before you sign off and things, to make sure that you've got all the assurances that you require. So we were looking at how can we get things sent to us electronically, how there was even paper files getting sent round and couriers and things as well. So we just had to think very quickly. The one thing we did was we usually run to a 5-year audit cycle and change the auditors, and it was my decision as the director of appointments that we wouldn't do that. And for the first time ever, we moved into a 6-year appointment round because we didn't think it was the right time to change auditors while public bodies were struggling. We were trying to find our feet. But we also did comply with FRC guidance because they say up to a period of 7 years. But that was very exceptional for us to extend the appointment round.
That's great, Elaine. Thank you for that. And yeah, no, it was a challenging time, the pandemic, but
Yes,
it has changed our
it
working
was.
lives in some ways, hasn't
It
it, as you
has,
said? Um,
definitely.
so we have a question from Yvonne Harrison, who asks, what advice would you give to your younger self just as you were about to start your career? If you go back and speak to Elaine when she was starting out, what advice would you give yourself?
Probably that I was taking the right path. I thought at the time I was taking the sort of second option or the second best, going down the apprenticeship route, because I didn't go to university full time. I went to GCU part time. I actually think it was the best thing I could have done because I've got more work experience, and I was able to learn in the job as I went along as well while I was doing my studies, and I could relate what I was studying to the work that I was doing at that time as well, which was particularly helpful. Probably the other thing I would say is I would maybe have got more involved in the profession. I left that very late in life, and I do actually regret that, but I seem to have caught up a bit now in terms of the work that I do with FRC and ACCA, and actually IFAC have asked me to do a session for them as well, the International Federation of Accountants, and they're going to be running some profiles shortly as well. So I'm pleased that I'm doing it now, but I wish I'd done it much earlier and could get more out of it as well. But probably tell myself I was taking the right path rather than the second option, probably would be the biggest piece of advice.
That's great. And you mentioned earlier about work-life balance and the importance of that. And I think there's more
Yeah.
awareness of the importance of that culturally now more than
Yeah.
ever, particularly in light of
Yes.
making sure that we support our mental health and that we have more of a rounded kind of work-life balance, like you say. Do you have any advice on how to ensure boundaries around your work so that you're able to secure that work-life balance? Because at your level, Elaine, and the demands on your time, I presume you could probably do your job 365 days a year if you really wanted
Yeah,
to. So
absolutely.
what strategies do you have to do to maintain that
Yeah.
balance?
That's a really good question, because you could make the job as big as that. And I think when you first go into a leadership role, you find that it's quite difficult to delegate. You want to do it all yourself. You've got your own standards and all that. That's a bad move. You need to learn to take your team with you. The thing that I work to actually is, and I recommend people look it up, and it's not just for people with disabilities, is the spoon theory. And that theory is basically that you've got so many spoons at the start of a day. How are you going to use them? Am I going to take the dog for a walk? Am I going to do my work? Am I going to travel? And think about how you're going to manage your energy throughout the day. And that can be particularly important for someone with a disability, but actually for everyone, because if you were to go at full speed meetings, I try to avoid, my executive assistant is very good at trying to stop back to backs, because at the beginning of the pandemic, there were some days I was just 8 hours flat out. I could hardly even leave the desk. So that's not a good way of working. And I think having breaks and also having other interests. And the funny thing that I can tell you about that is, on an annual basis, we actually have a health check at Audit Scotland as well, because we're out travelling in public bodies, etc. And the person that did mine a couple of years ago, he said to me, "Oh, I'll just skip through the physical activity because obviously you've got a disability, you'll not be doing anything." And I said, "Well, do you know, actually I was skiing last week, I was horse riding, and I was at the pool 2 nights." So I kind of flattened his thoughts, and he said, "I should have asked what you were doing." And I said, "Well, you'll not do that again." So it was quite funny, but I think making time to do these things is really important. And even in Audit Scotland, I think people are starting to call them belonging groups for wellbeing. So for different areas, we've got like a disability confident working group, we've got a carers group, there's LGBT, and there's support networks within the organisation. And I think that's really important as well. And throughout the pandemic, my small team, on a Thursday morning, we had our half-hour social meeting, and we weren't allowed to talk about work. In fact, I had the power to take people out of the call if they even said at the end, "Oh, I want to ask about," nope, that's not what we're here for. We need to make sure that people have got space and time to manage their wellbeing, because that is really important. And I think coming out of the pandemic, people have realised that as well, how much you should invest in your wellbeing.
Absolutely. I got a question here from Kathleen Kelly. How did you find completing an 18-month term as an Exceed Worldwide trustee? What made you want to work in a social enterprise that helps to support people that have disabilities and live in developing countries?
So I had actually finished my term just the year before at Cerebral Palsy Scotland. I had done 7 years there, and I said, "Look, you've got all my knowledge. I'm not sure that I can add anything else. It's time to move on." So one of the things that I can also share, because it applies to students, and I should have said that at the time, is there's an organisation called Accounting for International Development, and they advertise roles for finance skills. And actually there's ones in there for students over the summer holidays and things, that you can go out and help organisations elsewhere. So the real thing for me with Exceed was they were providing prosthetic limbs and orthotics to people in Asia and Africa that weren't able to source these things, and the difference that could make. So quite often people maybe couldn't walk, so they were housebound, they couldn't move anywhere, but if they got an orthotic or a prosthetic limb, that would have made such a difference to their life. And actually Bobby Charlton has just passed away a week or so ago. He was a huge supporter and actually one of the main funders of that organisation as well, and it was really powerful. There was lots of clinicians in the organisation, but they really needed some support with finance skills as well.
Great. So one final question for you, Elaine, from Elaine Boyd OBE, who has asked, what advice do you have for students and aspiring professionals pursuing ACCA qualifications, especially those facing physical challenges or other obstacles?
Yeah. So if you're doing the ACCA qualification and you've got challenges, and if even if there's financial challenges, ACCA have actually just launched ACCA Advantage. And if you contact Louise Young at ACCA, or sorry, Louise Graham it is, at ACCA, she can take you through that. Now, I'm happy to share how you can contact her and go through this programme. I've also been supporting another young lady that was part of the Shaw Trust Disability Power 100 around the intensity of the exams and how she might split them up and how she might get support. So the support is there, and Louise should be able to help, and also Sandy Aitken, but I'm happy to pass on the names of the people that will be able to help with that. And if you don't get anywhere, please get in contact with me directly as well.
That's wonderful, Elaine. Thank you very much. And just on behalf of the university, I would just like to take this opportunity to thank you for your input today. It's been really inspiring. And obviously you're a friend to GCU, so I'm sure we'll see you again to give more talks in the future. But thank you so much, and thanks for your time. We'll see you again.
No, thank you. It's a pleasure. And I am coming back to do a lecture in Audit in December. I don't know what that'll be like, but I'll see you next month. I'll be over. And it's always a pleasure to engage with the university.
Thank you, Elaine.
Thank you. Take care, folks. Thank you.